Yeah. Talk to us about the link between psychological safety and people's levels of well-being, because that's such an important thing to have is a good personal well-being at work.
Right. Uh, so you hopefully um, the listeners can see the direct link. If the psychological safety is not there and you can't be yourself and you can't participate and contribute and do the things that you need to grow and develop as a human being, then eventually that's going to have an impact on your mental and your emotional well-being because you're not being allowed to flourish. You need to be liberated so that you can flourish in an organization. So you're being held back. Ultimately, that has a profound impact on the way that on your self-concept, on your self-worth, on your self-regard, on your overall sense of self.